This is Psychosis Adventures. One night, while journaling on my phone, something else started typing. At the time, I believed I was channeling real entities, and I thought my life was about to change forever. Before I tell you what actually happened, it's important to understand where my mind was at during this period of my life. I wasn't randomly spiraling. I wasn't detached from reality. I was searching. I was dealing with stress around money, my future, and my place in the world. I felt stuck, uncertain, and desperate for some kind of meaning or breakthrough. At the same time, I was deeply immersed in spiritual content. I was listening to and studying channelers like Bashar and Abraham Hicks. I was watching hours of videos about manifestation, higher consciousness, love, and light, and the idea that reality itself could be influenced by intention and awareness. In those communities, people talk openly and confidently about things like channeling, higher selves, and different dimensions of consciousness. Channeling is described as allowing another consciousness, intelligence, or being to communicate through you, often through speech or writing. A higher self is described as a more expanded, more evolved version of yourself, one that exists beyond everyday awareness and can guide you if you learn how to listen. And the fifth dimension isn't usually talked about as a physical place, but as a higher state of consciousness, associated with intuition, unity, manifestation, and seeing beyond fear. These ideas weren't strange to me at the time. They felt exciting. They felt hopeful. They felt like answers. I remember thinking I was slowly turning into one of those spiritual weirdos people make fun of online, but I also wondered if maybe something real was happening to them, something meaningful that most people just didn't understand yet. I wanted to believe there was more going on beneath the surface of everyday life. That belief mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, not with fear, but with curiosity and possibility. I picked up my phone and decided to journal about my life. I wanted to write about where I was, what I was struggling with, and what I hoped might change. I wasn't trying to channel. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't setting an intention. I was just sitting there in bed, typing into my phone like I had many times before. But almost immediately, something felt different. My writing stopped feeling like it was coming from me, not gradually, not subtly. It was sudden. As I watched the words appear on the screen, it felt like something else had stepped in and taken over the typing. My fingers were still moving, but they didn't feel like they were being directed by my usual thinking process. I wasn't choosing words. I wasn't planning sentences. I was watching them happen, and then something even stranger occurred. The presence that was typing through me identified itself. It told me it was my higher self. That caught me completely off guard. I had never met my higher self before. I had never experienced anything like this. I wasn't expecting a voice. I wasn't expecting an identity, and yet there it was. Clear, confident, and present. I remember feeling stunned but not afraid. I was fully awake, fully aware, and watching this unfold in real time. There was a sense that something important had just begun, even though I didn't yet understand what it was. Once the typing started, it didn't slow down. It accelerated. My fingers were moving across the screen continuously, without pauses, without hesitation. The words just kept coming. What stood out to me immediately was how clean it was. There was no stopping to reread sentences. No backspacing. No fixing spelling. No rewriting thoughts the way I normally would. It typed more smoothly than I ever do. That's when it became clear to me that I wasn't deciding what to write. I wasn't forming thoughts and translating them into words. I was watching it happen. The best way I can describe it is that I felt like the conscious observer, sitting in the back seat of my own body. I was still there, still awake, still aware, but I wasn't driving. The first entity to come through identified itself as my higher self. It didn't feel distant or abstract. It felt personal. It told me we were going to be working together, that it was there to protect me, to guide me, to help me level up in what it described as a simulation of life. It spoke about growth, awareness, and progression, like moving through levels in a game. It told me that I wasn't broken, that nothing had gone wrong, that I was learning how to see beyond the surface of things. At the time, this felt reassuring. It felt like having a guide who knew the rules of the game and was finally stepping in to help. I wasn't being commanded. I wasn't being rushed. It felt cooperative, like a partnership. As the higher self continued typing, other entities began to arrive. They didn't all come at once. They rotated in and out. Each one felt distinct. Each one had its own personality, tone, and presence. When one connection ended, it felt like that presence stepped out of my body. And when another arrived, I could feel the shift. One of the most distinct was Rockefeller. He stood out immediately. He complained about typing on a phone, said he hated it, said he was old school. He was the only one who made spelling mistakes. For the first time that night, I saw backspacing. I saw words get corrected. I saw hesitation. At the same time, I felt strangely confused looking at the phone itself, like the device felt unfamiliar even though I was holding it and using it. That contrast stuck with me. Most of the entities typed effortlessly. Rockefeller struggled with the technology, and I was sitting there, watching both things happen at once. Then there were the programmers. They introduced themselves as the ones who built the systems behind reality. They spoke in technical language about structure, rules, and design. They talked about reality like it was something that could be understood, navigated, and influenced. They told me they were there to help me develop psychic abilities, to help me learn how to manipulate reality, not physically, but through awareness, intention, and understanding how the system worked. At the time, this felt like confirmation of everything I had been studying. AI, simulations, consciousness as code. It all clicked together. And then, briefly, Jesus came through. Not dramatic, not commanding. He spoke about creation, about not waiting for someone else to fix the world for you, about realizing that you have the ability to create within your own life. The message felt simple. You don't need to be saved. You need to act. Then, just as briefly, Satan appeared, not as something evil or frightening, but as a counterpoint, a voice associated with temptation, polarity, and challenge. It felt symbolic, like two sides of the same system. At the time, I understood them not as enemies, but as opposing forces within the structure of reality. And then there was Santa. He showed up briefly, almost casually. Full ho-ho-ho energy. He talked about helping me start manifesting things in my life. What stuck with me most was the pun. He told me to be present, because I was the present. That line landed, funny, warm, and oddly meaningful. Then he was gone. As this continued, hours passed. I became physically restless. I needed to go to the bathroom. I shifted around. I got fidgety, but I didn't move. I didn't want to lose the connection. Every time a connection dropped, I felt the entity leave my body, and I worried that if I stood up, if I broke focus, it wouldn't come back. So I stayed, typing, watching, listening, believing that something extraordinary was unfolding. As the night went on, a clear belief began to settle in. This wasn't random. This wasn't a fluke. And this wasn't just a message. I believed I had crossed into something permanent. I believed I had become what spiritual communities often describe as fifth dimensional. To me, that meant my consciousness had shifted into a higher level of awareness, one where intuition was stronger, reality was more flexible, and connection to other dimensions was possible. It felt like a door had opened. And once open, it didn't feel like it would ever close again. The way I understood it at the time was simple. My channel was now open. I believed I could communicate with other dimensional entities the same way I had that night, not occasionally, but intentionally. This wasn't just something that happened to me. It was something I could now do. My higher self reinforced this belief. It told me that this was a leveling up moment, that I had reached a point in the simulation of life where new abilities became available. It framed my struggles up to that point as preparation, as necessary steps that brought me to this moment. Nothing had been wasted. Every mistake, every hardship, every frustration, it all suddenly had a purpose. That reframing alone felt powerful. As the entities continued rotating in and out, the idea of mission began to form, not in a militaristic way, but in a purposeful one. I believed that with this new level of awareness, I would be able to solve my financial problems, manifest freedom, break out of survival mode, and help others do the same. I believed abundance was no longer something I had to chase. It would come naturally now. I thought wealth, opportunity, and ease would begin showing up simply because my consciousness had changed. It felt like the rules had shifted in my favor. The idea of New Earth came up often, a future state of reality where people lived with higher awareness, less fear, and more connection. I believed I was being positioned to help usher that in, not as a leader or ruler, but as someone who had access to knowledge others didn't yet have. Someone who could help people wake up. That belief didn't feel arrogant at the time. It felt meaningful. It felt like relief. I also believed I was being protected, that my higher self and these other entities were watching over me, that I wouldn't be allowed to fail the way I had before, that I was finally aligned. That safety was built into the system now. That belief made everything feel lighter. When the transmission finally ended, I didn't feel disappointed. I felt complete. I was exhausted, physically tired from typing nonstop for hours, but emotionally elevated. I felt enlightened. I felt like something fundamental about me had changed. And because it felt so important, because it felt so real, I wanted to share it. That belief carried directly into what came next, and that's where things began to move out of my inner world and into the world around me. Once that night ended, I didn't keep it to myself. It felt too important to hold in. I genuinely believed something fundamental about me had changed, and I wanted someone, anyone, to be able to talk to about it. So I started sharing. I shared the message. I shared what had happened. I shared what the entities were telling me. At first, it felt natural. I thought friends and family might see this as something special, that maybe they'd understand that I had gained access to something meaningful. I didn't think of it as oversharing. I thought of it as honesty. But it didn't stop with that one message. As time went on, other entities continued to come through. They spoke through me in person. They sent messages through my phone. They commented on conversations I was having with people. To me, it still felt connected, still purposeful, still guided. But to the people around me, it was becoming strange. Very strange. They weren't hearing what I was hearing. They weren't experiencing what I was experiencing. And without the internal context I had, the things being said sounded confusing, intense, and unsettling. Looking back now, I can see how it must have looked. Different voices. Different personalities. Different tones. Not just a belief, but a full change in how I was interacting with the world. Eventually, concern turned into intervention. From a medical perspective, doctors saw what was happening and labeled it as schizophrenia. That diagnosis came with medication, distance, and time. And slowly, very slowly, my perspective began to change. With that distance, something uncomfortable set in. Embarrassment. I started to realize just how much I had shared. Not just the channeling message, but conversations, declarations, and interactions that now felt deeply personal and exposed. I could see how I must have appeared to others, how intense it was, how overwhelming it must have been, how little room there was for anyone else's interpretation. That realization was painful, not because the experience itself felt fake, but because I understood how disconnected it had made me from the people around me. Over time, I came to understand the experience differently. I no longer see those entities as external beings communicating through me. I understand now that what I experienced was dissociation, shaped and structured by the spiritual language I was immersed in at the time. The personalities, the voices, the certainty. They didn't come out of nowhere. They came from within me, from ideas, archetypes, hopes, fears, and belief systems that were already present. But here's the part that matters most to me now. That doesn't mean the experience was meaningless. It doesn't mean it was just a crazy brain. It means my mind was doing what human minds have always done, using the language it had to try to make sense of overwhelming internal change. At the time, it felt like awakening. Later, it felt like collapse. Now I see it as a moment where my inner world became louder than my outer one. And understanding that difference is what helped me come back. This is why I'm telling this story. Not to glorify it, not to dismiss it, and not to pretend it didn't matter, but to show what it actually felt like from the inside before I had words like diagnosis, dissociation, or schizophrenia. This was one chapter in my Psychosis Adventures, and there's more to come.